part of the whole reason I'm doing this. Yeah, it's really great to be joined today by Citizens UK, who are going to be talking to us about community organising and all of the wonderful things involved with that. I don't know who I'm actually handing off to here. Is that Tom? Take it away, Tom.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along. It's great to have you join us today for this session, which is going to be an introduction to community organising. My name is Tom Chibo. I'm a community organiser with Citizens UK. We are the National Home of Community Organising. We're a charity that brings together lots and lots of community organising groups, such as faith groups, schools, colleges and universities, students' unions, trade unions, residents' groups, charities, groups which have an interest in social justice and the common good, but also want to be really effective at making change. And we work right across the country to support groups in doing that in big ways and in small ways. And so this session is really just to give you a kind of taster of community organising, which I know from personal experience is something which can help students' unions achieve change on a range of issues. And I think on this issue around decolonisation and changing the way that our universities operate will be really interesting. I'm also joined by a couple of colleagues, Saeed and Ali. Do you guys want to quickly introduce yourself before we start the presentation?
Hi everyone, I'm Saeed. I'm the lead organiser here in the West Midlands, just literally around the corner, not very far, 5 miles away from University of Birmingham Guild. Very delighted to be here.
Hi everyone, Ali Abdi, and I'm a community organiser in Wales with Citizens Wales, and I'm also delighted to be here this afternoon with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks guys. So hopefully you can all see my screen, and hopefully there's a presentation up there that says Introduction to Community Organising. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Good, all right then. So before I get into the substance of the talk, it's best to give a bit of an introduction so that you know who I am and why it is that you should actually pay attention to me today. So I'm speaking to you as a community organiser who is based in Leeds in West Yorkshire, where I work with a range of different organisations. But before I started working with Citizens UK, I was a student union officer. I was a sabbatical officer. I was elected president of Cambridge University Students' Union about a decade ago. And so I wanted to start by just acknowledging and recognising and respecting the work that you're all involved in as individuals and as officers in your students' union, and show a bit of solidarity, because I've kind of been in a similar situation of participating in making change happen in my university. I've experienced the joys and the challenges of being a student trying to make change on a range of issues. And so these are photos of those good times and the campaigns that I've been involved in. And I just say that by way of sort of introduction and to alert you to the fact that I'm rooting all of this stuff in community organising directly in the sorts of experiences that you would have as a student. And I really wish this sort of training and this sort of support was available to me when I was a sabbatical officer all those years ago. The great thing that I see when I look at the student movement at the moment is that there's been a real sea change in the last 10 years in our activism and some of the issues which are being taken up by student unions and the success that we're seeing. In particular, like liberation is becoming really central to the agenda of NUS and individual students' unions. And this idea of decolonisation of the curriculum isn't just a kind of academic subject, as it might have been back in my day. There are students on the ground, and you guys are evidence of this, that are taking this forward and making tangible changes to curriculums and how your universities are working. And the fact that there's this conference and there are so many people participating is a sign of that real shift, and that's really impressive to see, because it wouldn't have been possible back when I was a SAB in 2009-10. So well done for that. However, I think some of the challenges that we face as student union campaigners have remained the same. Collectively, the National Union of Students has membership of over 7 million people, and our individual students' unions represent thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people in communities around the country. And those huge memberships and those big numbers of people should make our movement completely undeniable and unassailable when it comes to making social change. The things that you're asking for ought to be delivered because you represent so many people. However, the truth is that our power and our influence over key aspects of the student experience doesn't always reflect that reality. Too often, our students' unions are shut out or ignored, or students fail to get the justice that you seek. And there are problems with this. At times, what it can lead to is a tendency to spend huge amounts of time and energy defining the problem or understanding and articulating the problems that students face. And I'm sure that many of the SABs and student union officers on this call might have had the experience of literally spending hours or days of their lives on writing and refining and arguing statements and motions for your own councils or for the NUS. But at the same time, we tend to commit less time and energy towards developing our capacity and the strategies that we need to win campaigns. So I can honestly say that I finished my year as a sabbatical officer as an absolute expert on the details of the problems that students faced. But I can't honestly say that I left my time as an absolute expert on how to win campaigns and what was actually effective. And often the ways that we invite people to participate in our campaigns and to join in with efforts to make social change are mostly about convincing a minority of people to become kind of politics or SU geeks like we are. So we say to them, run for election, write a motion, come to a boring meeting. You know, these are the things that we offer often, rather than developing the leadership qualities of that person and the political participation of the broader student community. So those problems, I'm sure that all of you will have encountered some version of them at some point during your time trying to make social change. And together they lead to a really depressing downward spiral where our expectations and aspirations as individuals and as a movement gradually diminish. So we start off trying to make meaningful change, and then we kind of diminish that and it turns into making noise, as much noise as possible. And then maybe that turns into something more like raising awareness. And then maybe that just turns into something which is more to do with my own personal understanding and education. And so one way of thinking about community organizing is it's an attempt to reverse that cycle and make all people who are trying to make social change more effective at making the change, but also have more capacity to build strong institutions that are capable of involving more and more people in the process of making that change. So that's a helpful way to think about community organizing. The roots of community organizing, as we practice it at Citizens UK, lie in the United States. The man on the left is Saul Alinsky, who started off his campaigning in Chicago. And he worked with groups who he defined as the have-nots, so typically working class and Black communities, who in various ways were victims of injustice or shut out of decision-making by elites. He codified and clarified some of the campaigning methods that we use today. And that journey started at a university. It started at the University of Chicago. He was in the middle of the PhD and was able to analyze and assess how the city was being dominated and run by certain social groups and institutions. And he started theorizing and thinking about, well, if that's how they work, how can those people who are locked out of power build their own power and have a seat at the table? On the right, you can see photographs of Rosa Parks at the top and Ella Baker on the bottom. And they are two leading civil rights activists in the United States of America during the 60s who participated in this very training of community organizing, which was developed and refined at the Highlander School in Tennessee. So Rosa Parks is most famous for her action to not get up from the seat of the bus and trigger a bus boycott. That action was developed after Rosa had done community organizing training at Highlander to understand the most effective methods and tools that could be used in those circumstances to try and make social change. And Ella Baker was a community organizer who mentored and supported many of the leading civil rights leaders of the day. So when we're talking about decolonization, I think it's important to recognize the role of community organizing historically in making social change on racial justice. And your participation in this training, and hopefully your use of these tools, is a way in which you can also be part of that heritage and carry it forward into the 21st century. Nowadays, in Citizens UK, we take those tools and we draw on that heritage and we bring groups together, faith groups, schools, colleges, universities, trade unions, charities, residents groups, for local and national campaigns that bring power to the people and that help everybody to get a taste of making social change on a range of different issues. And here are just examples of people doing this on a big scale and a small scale. At the top right is an action that Ali was involved in, which was based on getting halal Nando's in Cardiff. The bottom right is an action I was involved in with Leeds Trinity Students' Union, which was about getting a zebra crossing outside the entrance to the university. So they could be really small and local and specific things, or they can apply to really big campaigns and big issues that affect everyone around the country. So over £1 billion worth of living wages have been delivered to the poorest workers in our country since 2001, based on the living wage campaign that Citizens UK members have led, for example. In Birmingham, for example, the mental health service and the provision that was created for people aged over the age of 16 in recent years was driven by a campaign led by Citizens UK Birmingham and young people in this city. So on big things and on small things, these tools of organising have been proven to work over the last 30 years in this country. I could talk about organising and the theories behind it all day, but this conference is called Decolonisation in Practice. And so I think the best way for us to get into what community organising is to think very practically about what it challenges us to do and how we can use these tools in practice in our students' unions and with our campaigns. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do this by posing 5 questions which all people who are involved in some kind of community organising change will work through in the course of their campaign. And I suggest that if you use these 5 questions as a guide for your own campaigns and the decolonisation you want to see on your campus, then you will go a long way towards achieving your aims and embedding community organising. So that's how I'm going to play it. So the first question that all community organisers will ask at the very start of the campaign is, who are your people? If you want to make change, you need power. And you might not have the money or the status or the formal decision-making authority to make the change that you want. And if that's the case, then your power is going to come from what we call organised people. That means as many people as possible working together regularly for a common purpose or for a common goal. And community organising challenges us to think about this before we even get into the specifics of your cause or the issue that you're talking about. Before you consider the policy or the change itself, the most important thing is to set the right foundation, which is your power, and that comes from people. So in practice, what am I talking about? What I'm talking about is your campaign needs to start with a phase where you join up as many people as possible who are willing to work as a team. And if you're starting as an individual who feels that this issue is important or has identified a specific injustice, then you can start by inviting friends and neighbours and colleagues to join your team and meet with you. I imagine that most of the people in this meeting are actually active or have some connection with their students' union. So a students' union is a collection of organised people, but actually your students' union could grow your people by linking up with faith groups or community organisations or schools or residence groups in your city or town. The point is to grow and expand the number of people who are working with you on the change, and think deliberately and in a focused way about how that number of people can be as high as possible. And that should be something that you prioritize, because the more organized people you have behind you, the more power you have and the bigger the changes you seek. And it doesn't matter how correct you are, how clever you are, how bright your idea is, if you do not have power, then you will not be able to make any change. And all of your students' unions can participate in the work of Citizens UK, which brings together lots of these groups that are interested in social justice as a way of increasing your organised people. And just to give an example, this photograph is really illustrative. So right at the centre of the photograph, kneeling down with the white piece of paper in the middle of the photograph is Sylvie Pope. So Sylvie was a student at Manchester University. She was groped by a man at a nightclub and wanted to do something about harassment and misogyny, not just on campus, but just more widely in society. And rather than just kind of crusading on her own and writing things and calling for things from a position of being an individual, she invested a lot of time in developing relationships and building relationships so that in answering that question, who are your people, she could say, my people are a huge number of people who are very diverse. So she spent a lot of 2017 and 2018 building relationships and talking to people from a range of different community groups in Manchester. So yes, the Students' Union, but also the Unison branch, the Catholic charity Caritas, Cheadle Mosque, Manchester Vineyard Church, the Methodist Church in Manchester, Leavenshume High School, Manchester Metropolitan University. By talking to all of those groups and sharing her stories and her experiences with them and inviting them to be part of the campaign, she was able to launch that campaign with the backing of a huge number of people. And that photograph is from the launch of the campaign, and you can see all of the students from Leavenshume High School and the volunteers from Cheadle Mosque and other organisations who were launching that campaign with her. So she was starting with a lot of power, which allowed her to start campaigning for big change. And actually, this story has developed since then. So they didn't just stop in Manchester. Through working with Citizens UK, Sylvie was able to expand her people to include people in Nottingham and London and Newcastle and Cardiff and Birmingham who were also interested in this issue of misogyny and harassment. And they've been able to, in September, convince the Law Commission to recommend to all police forces that they include gender as a protected characteristic under hate crime legislation, which means that misogyny can be recognised as a hate crime for the first time. It's been piloted in Nottingham, and we hope to see it expanded right across the country. We would not be able to pursue that change if it was just Sylvie, or if it was just a small group of people very similar to Sylvie who were taking this campaign forward. The actual effort and time spent on building power and reaching out to different people in the community is what powered the campaign. So that's the first question. The second question is, what are your issues? So structural racism and the legacy of colonialism pervades British society and all of our institutions, including academia. I suppose everybody on this in this meeting knows that, and that's part of the reason why you're here. But campaigns that simply call for decolonization in a vague or abstract sense are not effective, because they'll simply let decision makers get away with lip service or empty gestures. They're also not effective because when we're just talking about decolonization in the abstract, you actually risk overwhelming or demoralizing the people that you're trying to have participate in your campaign, particularly if they're not necessarily people with experience of being involved in campaigning or politics before, because you're basically throwing at them a massively complex problem. And the magnitude and complexity of the problem becomes really, really overwhelming. And nobody wants to sign up for a task that seems impossible to complete. What? So you're going to eliminate all decolonization? What? So you're going to put an end to racism? People, in the backs of their minds at least, even if they don't say this to you, will kind of think, well, that's not really possible for you and your small group, or that's not really possible for just your Students' Union. And that's a really demoralizing situation to be in, and it actually leads people to back away from participation in your campaign. So what community organising teaches us to do is to break down those big and complex problems like decolonisation into really small and tangible issues which demand a specific response in terms of action or a decision. So it's not, and this isn't just a matter of like what's good tactically, it's also an acknowledgement of the fact that racial injustice is something that's not an abstract concept. What it actually is something experienced every day in real places where we live, work, play, and study. So if that is true, we need to tackle it in those terms, which are connected with specific experiences and specific decisions. So in practice, what we encourage all people to do at this stage is to have as many conversations as possible with the people around you that are interested in this issue, that are willing to be part of your team. And those conversations shouldn't be focused on the abstract concept of decolonization. They should be focused on what are your personal experiences of this within higher education. And you should listen carefully to the specific injustices that make people most angry or motivate people to change. So there's no need at this stage for an academic seminar or a political debate. Just focus on sharing your personal story and listening to the other person's testimony. In community organizing, we call these conversations one-to-ones. They're a cornerstone of all of our campaigns. And if you join the session that we're doing tomorrow morning, you'll get to understand them a bit more and you'll get a bit of time to practice those conversations. But basically, they help you identify what the best issue is to start with. And once you have that specific and tangible issue, you can then make a clear and straightforward ask or a demand for change. And ideally, it will be something very clear that requires a yes or a no answer. And this photograph is illustrative because it's an event that I ran to promote the real living wage, which is an hourly rate of pay which Citizens UK campaigns for all employers to adopt, which is higher than the minimum wage, but recognises the actual cost of living. And this is a group of employers in my area in Leeds who have committed to paying that rate of pay instead of the government's minimum wage, and therefore provide low-paid workers with enough money to live. Now, that campaign is a living wage campaign. It's not an anti-poverty campaign. It's about a very specific and tangible issue that's been cut out of that big problem of poverty. And that specific issue emerged because we spent time in 2001 having those one-to-one conversations with families, initially in East London. And we listened to those specific personal testimonies of injustice. And they included stories about parents lacking time to spend with family, children being unsupervised after school because mum and dad had to go out to work, people spending 2 or 3 hours on a night bus overnight in order to get to an early morning cleaning shift because they can't afford the train, the stress that comes from juggling 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet because the pay that you get for the work that you do doesn't cover the cost of living. It's in those conversations and the specifics of those stories that we alighted on this idea and this concept of making this specific issue of the hourly rate of pay the campaign that we wanted to run. And it's a very, very clear and specific ask for any business or any employer about whether you're going to pay that rate or not. It doesn't lead to an endless debate and a complex discussion and a seminar about poverty in the abstract. It's just a very, very clear and specific issue. And you might find, as you're running your campaigns on the issue of decolonization, that your opponents or the people that you're trying to convince will constantly try and add complexity and problematize your specific issue. Oh, it's much broader than that. It's much more complex than that. There's all these other things to consider. So you need to be really, really clear and precise with what you're asking so that there's really no wiggle room. It's just a yes or a no as to whether they're going to do it. The third question that we work through in our community organizing campaigns is who has the power to say yes or no? So once you've got your people and you've got your specific issue that you're going to work on, you then have to think about your target. You need to pick a target. So identify somebody who's got the power to actually do something about the injustice and focus your campaign there. And we really want you to be as specific as possible. Asking a big faceless institution, the government, the university, the English department, the committee, to do something just gives the decision makers space to pass the buck and avoid accountability. And you can find yourself in a situation where you're being fobbed off, or you're just being passed from pillar to post between different people who are kind of unhelpful or irrelevant. And that's incredibly draining, incredibly frustrating. And many students who have that experience will back away from wanting to do more campaigning. So what you need to do is you need to name the specific person who's got authority to do something and directly call on that individual to take personal responsibilities and to act. Now, that person might not be the first person that you're sent to. It might be that there's somebody who's designated contact with your group or with students in general that you always have a relationship with, and they don't have the power. It might be that you don't know who the person is and you need to do a bit of research to find out who it is. Don't be afraid to do that research, to ask people directly who makes the final decision, what is their name, and make sure that everybody in your team knows that name, and you build all of your future actions around that person. In this picture, you can see a group that I worked with in Leeds, who lived on an estate called the Beck Hills Estate in North Leeds. And that estate had many problems, particularly problems with a lack of repairs, broken steps and pavements that were really, really unsafe. And these have been problems for years and years and years. And each of these residents had a story about how they were affected by this, ranging from, people who can't push prams up and down the estate, people falling and being injured, or people just feeling really demoralized and upset with the state of the place where they live, a lack of pride in where they are from, and a sense of powerlessness that they weren't being listened to. Because every now and then people would complain, they'd ring up the council to ask for something to get fixed, or they'd go along to a council meeting, or they'd go to a surgery of one of their local councillors for years and years. And many of the people that they spoke to would empathize, would listen, be understanding, would show that they care, would say, well, I really wish we could do something, but nothing seemed to get done. So when they started working with us, we took a community organizing approach and we worked through these questions with the group. And it turned out that we could find out who had the power to designate the £400,000 or so that it would cost to repair all the steps and pavements in the estate. And his name was Martin Farrington. And nobody on the estate had ever heard of him. No one on the estate had ever met with him. They were going to these meetings with their local councillors thinking they were the ones with the power to do a yes or no, and they just weren't. And essentially, they were wasting their time. So we directed our campaign entirely at Martin. And this is a photograph from the meeting we organised with him to present our case and to talk through the challenges on the estate. And you can see him being presented with a framed photograph. Martin is the Director of City Development. And so he's responsible for a lot of the big major developments in our city. And in that photograph, you can see pictures of the new music arena that was built in Leeds, the new shopping centre in the city centre, the new John Lewis, big changes to the city. And alongside those photographs, we added a lovely photograph of our estate and the broken steps and pavements. And we asked Martin directly to support us and to approve the funding so that our estate could get fixed in the next financial year. And eventually Martin agreed. And now that would never have happened if residents kept on going back to the same people around them who, despite being nice and well-meaning and polite and sympathetic, did not have the power to do anything. And so often students are put in that situation where they don't get to the real decision maker, or they are directing their campaigns generally at the institution rather than at a specific individual who's challenged to make a decision. So that's what this picture illustrates. So I've shared with you the first 3 of 5 questions which we ask all people to work through if they are using community organising in their campaigns. Who are your people? What are your issues? And who has the power to say yes or no? So those are very specific questions. Next up, I want to hand over to you and give you guys some space to have some conversations in small groups. And we're going to talk a bit about those questions from your particular perspective. In each of your groups, there'll be myself or another organizer in there to facilitate the conversations. And we're going to start exploring some of these issues in a more practical and local way. Does that sound okay? Right, okay. So then the next phase is just to open the breakout group. So hopefully we can be divided between myself, Ali, Saeed, and Tom, and we're going to spend 20 minutes together in our breakout rooms. Tom, I think I need to share with you the questions, don't I?
Yes, that would be useful. Yeah.
Okay. I'll read them out first before we break up. Okay. So the first question that we're going to base the conversation on is, what specific change are you seeking, and why does it resonate with you personally or the people that you work with? And the second thing that we're going to talk about is, what's the name of your target? So who's what's literally the name of that person for your institution? And if you don't know who that person is, or if you don't know their name, who can help you find out? Okay, so they're the questions that we're going to be reflecting on in our groups. And Tom, hopefully, Saeed has just put them in the chat for everyone to see. That's perfect. So hopefully, hopefully everyone can see those questions, and we should be divided into groups any second, and we'll get back together in about 20 minutes.
Yep, give me a second. Oh, it's wanting me to do them manually. Hang on.
You have to manually add everybody.
Yeah. So we've got 4 rooms.
And hopefully me, you, Ali, and Saeed are in separate rooms.
Yep. Okay, I think that's good.
Great. See you guys in 20 minutes.
The first one's back. Hi, Tom.
All right. I think that's everybody, isn't it? Okay, so hopefully you had interesting conversations in your groups. We were asking to talk about the specific changes you're seeking and why they particularly resonate with you personally, and also, if possible, the name of your target or who's got the power to do something. And if you don't know the name, who can help you get there. The purpose of these conversations, again, is to take this out of the theory. This is decolonization in practice, right? To get us thinking practically about how we'd start applying these community organizing tools and questions for the work that we're doing. And also they should give you an insight in the sorts of conversations that you would be having if you took a community organizing approach to your campaigns. Maybe it might be worth spending 2 minutes. In fact, I'm just going to ask the facilitators for each group, if you could share maybe 1 sentence or 2 sentences generally about your conversations, how they went, were they interesting, is this stuff connecting and landing, or are people sat there thinking, I don't have a clue, this doesn't make any sense. How's it going? Maybe let's start with Saeed.
Hi everyone, delighted to be with 2 amazing colleagues at the University of Birmingham in law and in geography. And very quickly, the first thing was around prayer space. There's only 2 sites kind of for prayer space in the big campus, and it's pretty difficult if you want to get to them between lectures and other things. And there was an amazing amount of piece of listening and research done by one of the colleagues around in geography, kind of unpacking a range of topics that affects Black and ethnic minority students. But we ended very briefly, on not trying to get to the next stage. It's really difficult as a community organizer to jump to the next stage, which is about power. But actually both colleagues took us there very quickly. And so in identifying who really can make the decision, we started talking about the power. So it wasn't really estates, because when you talk prayer space, everyone says estates. It's not. If a pro VC wants to make something happen, it'll happen. And then the other one, right, okay, so who owns it? Do we all leave all of these things to the EDI lead and that's it? So really who's going to own those particular things? I'll stop there. There's more than a sentence. It's a very long paragraph.
It was a long paragraph. I'm going to institute a strict 2-sentence rule now. Ali, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I had 2 fantastic participants also with myself. They shared some really good examples from within the university, but also personal experiences out in their communities. And I was also pleased to share with them the Nando's action and how we got a reaction. We got an action from we got a reaction from our action, and in the sense of we threatened Nando's to occupy the restaurant where we got our Halal Nando's campaign win. And it got the reaction to get them around the table to negotiate when they were actually being very difficult. And we were going to occupy the restaurant. We found there were 60 seats in the whole of the restaurant. And so we had 60 people ready on the busiest time of the day, on the busiest time of the week to occupy the restaurant and really hit them where it hurts. And eventually they gave in because, we did lots of social media attention. We got a reaction from them. We got a seat at the table. And we managed to then negotiate and get our win. So yeah, I managed to share that with the group too. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Ali. Tom?
Thank you. Yeah, so we were talking about research ethics really as kind of one of the things that the 2 people I was with were quite interested in, and how that perhaps needs some reform. Initially, the conversations were about you know, would it be best to have an event or that sort of thing where we kind of discuss it further? But then we kind of started to be more grounded in the second question, as you said, about like who specifically can influence it and the power question, and didn't quite have time to get to the answer to it. But actually, we need to start thinking about who influences the university's ethics policies for like research and research ethics, and how we can find that out.
Thanks, Tom. And yes, so these questions, obviously, like, this is slightly artificial because we're doing an 1.5 hour training session. In real life, you'll be working as a team, and you can have, you know, entire meetings where you get into the depth of these things. And this session is really just to whet your appetite. So hopefully you take the principles that we're using here and you can apply them back with your campaigns and back at your universities. And yeah, in my group, I had a great conversation with JJ and Jocelyn, and we weren't really in a position in each case to highlight a very specific ask, but it was really fascinating to hear about JJ's previous work as a student rep, and Jocelyn's work at the Animal and Plant Sciences Department in Sheffield, and how they're both working for social justice and addressing issues in the curriculum. But we spent a lot of time also just like unpacking and exploring why we care about these issues and why we're interested in making change as people and our specific stories. And I found that really energizing and really inspiring. I suppose that reminded me of the importance of that time that's spent on having conversations and building relationships with people before you get into the specific practicalities. So yeah, great to have those conversations. I'm going to move on and continue the presentation and reveal the 2 final questions out of 5. So the 4th question, which you need to work through in a community organising campaign, is what public action can you take to provoke a specific reaction from the decision maker? So here's where you get to the bit which is most exciting, which I think people are often itching to start talking about and start planning. And I may be a bit frustrated that I've made you focus on these 3 other questions beforehand. So the action point, the public action point, is where you are doing something exciting with people that's designed to influence the decision maker. And that's all we mean by public action. It's just a piece of jargon, really. And all successful campaigns have an element of this. Now, to do public action well, in a way that's in keeping with community organising principles, it requires a subtle but really important change of emphasis compared to what we might ordinarily do or think. And it goes like this. Rather than thinking about raising awareness or thinking about making as much noise as possible, we have to specifically focus on provoking a specific reaction from the target that brings about the change that you want or takes you one step closer to the change that you want. I'm emphasizing that because when you focus on that, that then dictates what you end up doing later. And a good practical way to make sure that you're in that right mindset and you're planning in the right way to be effective is to start as a group by agreeing and writing down the desired reaction you want from your target, from the decision maker, and literally write it down as a statement or a thought that you hope that that decision maker will say aloud or think in their head after you've done your action. That's the idea. So literally write it down and be that specific about it. Once you've done that, that statement, that reaction, and the reaction might literally be, I really need to meet with that decolonized Birmingham group. Or the reaction might be, oh gosh, we've got to change the reading list. Or the reaction might be, I need to rethink that decision that I made. Or it might be, maybe I'm gonna do things a bit differently. You know, you literally make it a statement. Once you've got that, that statement, that reaction becomes your lodestar as you plan the actual practicalities of the thing that you're going to do with all the people. Now, that might sound a little bit restrictive because I'm making you literally write a statement and then build everything around that statement. But what you'll find is having that focus actually frees you up to be much more creative and innovative with your action, because we tend to get into patterns of reproducing sort of the protest march or the petition or the boycott, kind of taking it off the shelf and applying it to our current situation, because we saw that's what somebody else did last time. Whereas when you're focused on the reaction, you can become intentional and craft what you do, whatever the activity is, around what you need to provoke the reaction. Now, in tomorrow's session, when we get into community organizing skills, we will go into a bit more detail about how to craft a good action, what kind of things you should be thinking about when you're making that decision. But two things I think that are worth highlighting in this session that act as general principles. The first is that you should always consider how you can use turnout to your advantage. In community organizing at Citizens UK, we often say that 90% of the value of the action that you take is in the turnout, the people who turn up. Because you demonstrate your power by assembling or including as many people as possible in your action. And so a big turnout of people or a mass participation, it shows that you have lots of organized people behind your cause. And you should set a realistic target and literally write down the number that you're aiming for of people that you want for your action based on the number of people you think it will require to get the reaction from your decision maker. So that's the first thing. Turnout is vital, and being really focused on that in your action is vital. And sometimes in the student movement, we don't always do that. Sometimes we put on an event, put on an occasion, we don't plan to maximize turnout, or we don't take an honest assessment of how many people it's going to take to get the decision maker to move. The second thing you should probably think about is the idea of confrontation. All good actions contain an element of confrontation. And confrontation, all that means is bringing the reality of the situation and the people who are affected directly in front of the decision maker or the target. Okay, that's all that means. So it doesn't necessarily have to be nasty or mean or loud or anything, but it's just about bringing those two things literally face to face. You know, it comes from the Latin for foreheads together. And so when you design your action and you plan what it is you're going to do with all these people, you need to do it in a way which presents the target with the lived experience of people who are facing the reality of your issue. And that can be done in all sorts of different ways. It could be done through spoken testimony, through performances, visual stunts, art, presenting gifts, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, as long as it's an effective way to bring that reality face to face with the decision maker. This photograph shows an action that took place a few years ago in Croydon in South London at the headquarters of a big insurance company called Allianz. And this action was delivered by some further education students led by a student called Ishmael, who I had the privilege of working with. So Ishmael and his friends were angry and righteously angry and wanted to seek justice on the issue of jobs and opportunities for young people. And two things had happened in the local area. So the first thing that happened was they felt like the young people of that community, most of whom went to Croydon Further Education College, had been disrespected by this company. And perhaps it wasn't coincidental that disrespect happened, was delivered to a young population that was majority Black and from ethnic minorities as well. The chairman of the company said the key issue is to how we're going to continue to find people to work for our organization, because we're seeing a drift out of Croydon of the middle classes who traditionally been our employees. And if they're not here in 2 or 3 times, so if that middle class population isn't here in 2 or 3 years time, we won't be here. So effectively what he was saying was, if the middle class population is leaving, we're going to leave, because we're not interested in these young people and their potential to work for our organization. We'll just go somewhere else. So they felt disrespected. And then when Ishmael went to a public event where the chief executive of the company was present, he asked a question and said, well, you know, can't you set up some work experience schemes to help young people like me and others from Croydon College get involved in your company, learn about it? And the chief executive of the company said no. They rarely give out work experience, but it tends to only be to people, to the children of my friends and colleagues who work here. So basically, the young people of Croydon were being shut out of the jobs market and being publicly disrespected by a local company. So the action that Ishmael decided to take was specifically designed to get a reaction from the chairman so that he would sit down and talk to them about practical ways to provide young people from Croydon Further Education College and the rest of the borough an opportunity to work at a company like Allianz. And so the action was this. You can see it here in the photograph. Ishmael gathered a good team of dozens of young people who cared about this issue because he's invested time in having conversations with them about the specific challenges they faced. And they decided to all gather and one by one enter the headquarters, suited and booted with their CVs, and to ask the receptionist one by one to please deliver their CV personally to the chief executive because they're interested in getting a job at Allianz and would like to have a conversation about what work opportunities there were. And so the sheer volume of these dozens of young people, all looking and sounding really impressive, presenting their CVs to the desk of Allianz, directly being delivered later to this chief executive who ends up with a pile of CVs of young people from the borough who are interested and bright and talented and capable of working there, provoked a response. The reaction was, he picked up the phone and called us and said, I need to have a meeting with this group, Croydon citizens. We need to talk about work experience, what's going on. And within days, a meeting was set up and the team negotiated a new work experience program so that young people from Croydon Further Education College got work experience at Allianz and a first sort of a step on the first rung of the employment ladder and a route into the company, having been disrespected and shut out previously. So that's what that action was about. And everything about that action was crafted around getting that specific reaction. So they didn't just have a random rally. They didn't just set up a random petition because they weren't going to get the reaction that they wanted. The final question, you've got your people, you've identified your issue, you've worked out who the decision maker is, you've done an action that's provoked a reaction from them. The final question is, are you willing to sit down and negotiate and do a deal? And this is really, really vital because your campaign might have a fairy tale ending. So it might be that you identify all of the different things that need to change in order to decolonize the curriculum in your particular area. And then you write them down, you present them in a really articulate letter. The head of department reads the letter. They come out into the front steps of the department and announce to everybody that they're gonna do everything you asked for. That probably won't happen. More likely, the action that you take, or potentially several actions that you take, secure a meeting, a conversation with the decision maker about the specifics of what you're asking for and how far they can go. Now, many people get nervous or have kind of principled objections to sitting down with people who they think are responsible for the problem, or who have been the perpetrators of injustice, or who have neglected their issue. And sometimes there's real feelings of anger and frustration that prevent people from sitting down and having that conversation. Sometimes people are justified in that because they've had bad prior experiences of dealing with the decision maker or the institution. Sometimes there's mistrust or fear of being deceived or co-opted by that organization. Sometimes it's just that, as students, we might be in a position where we lack confidence, where we're not the people who run the department. Maybe they know more than us. Maybe the setting, the room, the meeting, the circumstances are really intimidating. Maybe we'll be isolated. We're the only student in the room, or we'll potentially face a hostile reception. All of those concerns are valid. All of them potentially hold us back from entering the room to negotiate. However, those of you who are student union representatives, who are course reps or sabbatical officers already, will know that you absolutely need to be in the room in order to make that change happen. There is a lot of support that you can find from within your students' union in terms of supporting you to prepare for these things, but also Citizens UK as an organisation, we take this phase really, really seriously. And so we train people in how to perform really well in these circumstances and how to get the most out of these sorts of negotiations. And it's partly to do with particular tips and tricks of presentation, and it's partly to do with our own mindset and our approach and our strategy as well. I don't have time to get into all of them, but the key thing is you need to have that willingness to sit down and negotiate, and Citizens UK can help you with that. This photograph is illustrative of a campaign that we ran a few years ago around child detention and the importance of negotiating there. We spent many years working with people who were new citizens or immigrants to the UK in all sorts of circumstances, identifying challenges with the immigration system. And one of the big specific issues we worked on was this problem where children were being detained, sometimes indefinitely in detention centres like Yarlswoods, sometimes being ripped out of their homes in the middle of the night and taken to these places, all because of the immigration status of their parents or a lack of paperwork or whatever it was. It was a real injustice that was causing real harm to those individuals and harm to the communities they were part of. And we ran several actions to try and get decision makers to meet with us. We had people dressed up as Santa Claus go into Yarlswood Detention Centre to deliver presents to the children who were based there. We had teams of people around the country negotiating with parliamentary candidates from the three main parties to convince those candidates to get messages to the leaders of those parties. We even had a big assembly where we had 2,000 people in a room, and Nick Clegg and David Cameron, the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, were challenged directly in front of those people to make a commitment to end the detention of children. And they did make that commitment. They agreed to end it. But at that point, the deal hadn't been done. The justice wasn't seen. We needed to sit down with the Home Office and negotiate the detail of how this took part. And it was complex and difficult. And they came to us saying, yeah, we're convinced that you're right, but actually there's some real challenges in ending this thing right now. What do you do about this situation or this place or that place? And our team of leaders spent several months working through with ministers and officials at the Home Office the details of how to end that indefinite detention of children. And it led to things like they had to set up an independent family returns panel. They had to support the UK Border Agency to train a team of specialist family caseworkers. They had to open a pre-departure accommodation centre at Gatwick that was run by Bernardo's to provide support for children who were coming out of detention or who are being deported for some reason. We had to set up an independent child detention monitoring panel. All of those things came out of negotiations of the detail of how to get this thing done. Now, if we had stepped back from that or decided it's not our place or that we're not capable of having those discussions and weren't willing to compromise and do a deal over the details of those things, then we might not have got the change. Or we could have got the change, but it would have been delivered in a really bad way. Students absolutely deserve to have a seat at the table, but also need to be at the table in order to ensure that justice is really done, even if the institution is well-meaning and positive and wants to do the right thing. So I suppose my final encouragement and the final question here of community organising is it doesn't stop with the big shiny action, and it doesn't even stop when they say yes. You need to keep being there with a seat at the table, negotiating around the specifics of what you're asking for. And the great thing is that everybody who's in this meeting is part of a students' union that exists to help facilitate that and enable that to happen on an ongoing basis. And so all of this community organising work is supportive of and strengthens your students' unions and helps make them more effective. So those are my 5 questions. And for me, they serve as a helpful introduction to community organising. But again, this is just about whetting your appetite. And this is just about, a first step, an introduction. Tomorrow's session gets into more detail of how you do some of these things practically. And then on an ongoing basis, there are ways in which Citizens UK can support you. But before we end, I've got a couple of slides to show you like pointers for how you can learn more through books, social media and training. But I just wanted to give you guys a final chance to ask any questions or throw anything at me if something wasn't clear, doesn't connect with you, hasn't landed, or just to share whatever your reaction is to what I've said so far. So yeah, does anyone, you can raise your hand or put a reaction in on the screen if you do, or just wave if there's anything that you want to share, or you can use the chat if you want to write down any questions for us. I can pick that up. Mary.
I suppose I have got, it's not really, one of the things that did come up in our discussion and is because I live in a really rural area. And so when you get to the point 2, I think it was, with the power and bringing people along, a lot of the things that you've spoken about take place in urban areas, and I wondered whether you have anybody who particularly has experience on working in more rural areas, or whether there's things that would be helpful in that aspect.
That's a really good question. Mary, which part of the country are you from?
I'm in Mid Wales.
Mid Wales, okay, right. So I suppose two things. Yes, that's absolutely true. And in my view, it's one of the faults of our country is that power is quite concentrated, right? So we do have to like work in the world as it is. So sometimes like the decision maker is in London or Cardiff or wherever, and that's just a fact. But and this movement has originally, the places that first adopted it were all towns and cities. So you'll notice that. However, Somerset and Wales, we have examples of groups and organisations that have participated in citizens that are more rural. And I think in Nottinghamshire as well, which is, I mean, sort of small towns in Nottinghamshire as well, where that has happened. And they're worth picking up on. So certainly Citizens Somerset, I know are working across quite a large area, and it's not, you know, it's not all in cities. Ali, it might be worth bringing you in because Citizens Cymru Wales kind of works across the whole country, basically, not just in Cardiff.
Absolutely, yeah, no, thank you, Tom, and hi, Mary. So in the more rural parts of Wales, if you like, and Narberth particularly in North Wales, we've got some community sponsorship taking place there. So in terms of welcoming a Syrian family through our community sponsorship model, that has worked really well in terms of engaging with civil society organisations and churches, mosques, local groups. And if I'm correct, there's a couple now, I think up to 2, maybe 3 families now settled there. And so, yeah, I think, you know, you can often start with something like that and then grow into other campaigns and other, you know, projects. In the more, so I'm based in Cardiff, where our action centre is. So there is more actions and more campaigns here taking place. But that's not to say we can't start having a conversation with you where you are, because like I said, like Tom said, we are Citizens Wales, so we are looking to engage, you know, across Wales with our work. So definitely want to link up via email and to follow up for sure. I'd like to do that.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that we try, sometimes what it requires is to broaden your alliance, if you see what I mean. So if you're from a small place, or you know, if you're from a village or a town, your alliance might need to stretch across many villages and towns, or be regional, in order to have the power and the influence to get what it is that you want. And so the people in that rural place just need to be connected with and understand that they're doing action alongside others. And the work with community sponsorship and with the Sanctuary Pledge, actually, on child detention relied on that heavily. And I also have really fond memories of going to a Citizens Cymru Wales assembly ahead of the first minister elections. And what was really impressive is, Ali, you'll know the numbers, but I think there's something like 40 constituencies in Wales. And I think there were people from 39 constituencies in the room negotiating with Carwyn Jones and the other candidates for First Minister at the time. And I was just there as an observer with some people we were doing training with to just kind of demonstrate what happens. But that was really good. And it showed that like people from rural parts of Wales were still connected and participating in the campaign along with the people from urban areas. And it was kind of on an equal basis. So yeah, we put a lot of effort into that.
Thank you, and I'll get in touch with you, Ali. Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Your email in the chat, and Ali can definitely follow up with you. I'm gonna very quickly, before my time runs out, share a couple of things about what to do next. So as I mentioned, we have local alliances in lots of different places around the country. Here's a list of places which have a local alliance right now or are founding a local alliance very, very soon. So you as an individual, but also your students' unions or any other community organisation that you might be part of, you know, your church, your residents group, your trade union, whatever, can join the citizens group in that area and participate in campaigns and bring issues to them so that they can support you with the campaigns that you think should be run. So if you're in any of these places, I recommend that you get in touch with us fairly urgently, and we can connect you with a local organizer and a group of people who are already working on things and want to support you. We offer training. So these tools and these principles that I've been talking about, there's a whole methodology and a way and an approach to making change, which we unpack and deliver in training. Tomorrow's session, you will get a taster of those skills. But every Thursday online, we're running online community organizing training, learning for leaders and community organizing masterclasses that are really pitched at people who are fairly new to organizing, to get an understanding of how organizing can support you with your campaigns. So you'll get an insight into these practical skills, but also you will get an insight into broader themes. And so over the next month, we're looking at power and privilege, and how that can affect our campaigns or our institutions, and how community organizing can help. We'll be looking at leadership and all sorts of other things, and you will learn those skills very practically. And this is a very accessible way to find out about these things. So you can register at our website, citizensuk.org/learning, and you can find out more about it. Our website isn't the best website, but the information is there. It is getting revamped in the next month and will look very, very different soon. And then the final thing is, in the alliances and with our institutions, we run bespoke training. So me, Saeed, Ali, like part of our job is we run training sessions and courses for organizations. And so that includes students' unions. So I mentioned the work that I was doing with Leeds Trinity University Students' Union. And we can organize that for you if you are interested. And so there's an email address there for someone called Nadia who organizes our training. And if you get in touch with Nadia and you say where you're from and what you're interested in, she can connect you with the right local organizer to potentially provide training for your students' union or your campaign team. And then the final thing is, just as individuals, there are lots of ways that you can find out more about what we're doing and in your own time kind of just absorb what's going on. So we've got our website, citizensuk.org. If you want really more up-to-date information about what's going on, then on social media, the best platforms to follow us on are Twitter and Facebook. But then if you're looking for a bit more depth, I've got two recommendations for you. So one is the book, How to Resist, by Matthew Bolton, who's our chief executive. So Matthew has really, in quite an accessible and like small book, distilled a lot of these things that I've been talking about in a way that's very, very handy, really easy to read, very clear. It is not written assuming that you have, you know, in-depth political knowledge or are a political scientist or anything like that. It's very, very accessible. It's meant to be something that you can use in a practical way, and anybody can come to this work because that's what we believe. So that book is available, and you can get that from whatever bookshop you use now. But and also, I spoke on a podcast called The Echo Chamber recently, and I shared these questions in more depth and over more time, and had a conversation with people who are maybe a bit more skeptical or find this kind of thing a bit more challenging. And that I think is quite a good listen, because yeah, it allows you to kind of reflect and think about how you apply these things, particularly to issues around racial justice and decolonization. So I think that's also another thing that might be helpful for you. All right, I think that's all I'm going to say, because my time has run out. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that was useful and you got something out of it. Tomorrow morning at 10, we've got the second session, which is going to look more at skills. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys there. Otherwise, feel free to email us and check us out on the links that I've shared if you want to find out more. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom and the Citizens team. It was really, really useful session. Just on from a personal note, I really would recommend the Thursday evening sessions. I've been going along to them over the past month and found them really useful. And I think the next month is actually on race and power. So hopefully it's useful to people who are interested in decolonizing kind of stuff as well. If you are sticking around for the next session in the conference, it is at 4:30 with Sarah Otobo talking about the work that she's been doing as a consultant in higher education, looking at Black Lives Matter. Cool. Yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.